A few hours later. A few hours later. A few hours later. A few moments 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 later.
5 minutes later.
15 minutes later. 2 minutes later. Sometime later. A few days later. What?
Several hours later. Several hard-hitting hours later. Several soda-fueled hours later. Several song-filled hours later. Several thinkable hours later. Many 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 hours of fun time later. Many adorable hours later. Many boring hours of cleaning later. Many chilly hours later. Many unbearable hours later. Tomorrow for sure. 24 hours later. 24 hours later. Early the next morning. Stupid early the next morning. 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 The next. The next morning. 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 The next morning.
The next more.
The next morning. The next morning. The next morning. Like every morning. The next day. 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 The next day in a parallel universe. The very next day. The following day. Tomorrow. The very next evening. The next evening. The next Christmas. Next level. Days later. 1 day later. 1 full day of fatherly fun later. Day 2. 48 hours later. 2 days later. Day 3. 72 hours later. 3 days later. 3 days later. 3 days later. 3 days later. Day 4. 4 to 6 days later. 4 to 6 more days later. 6 messy days later. Several 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 long days later. Many disorderly days later. 1 week 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 later. 1 smelly week later. 1 soggy week later. 1 weekend of pampering later. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. 16 paranoia-filled days later. 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later. 4 to 6 weeks later. 6 to 8 weeks later. Several weeks later. Several weeks later. 6 months.
Months later.
6 months later.
6 months later.
6 stinky months later. 7 months later. Several months later. Several months later. Many months later. 2 to 3 years of post-production later. 12 years later.
70 years later.
75 years later. 2,000 years later. 2,000-ish years later. 3,000 years later.
3,000 years later.
4,000-ish years later.
5,000,000 years later.
One entree later. An eternity later. An eternity later. One eternity later. Opening night. A couple of hours later. A lot of boring math later.
A lot of wallpapers later.
Very boring walk later.
Many frame building attempts later. Many heartfelt traditions later. Many attempts to fix the past later. Many parts of the process later. Many amusements later.
Many buckets later.
Many exam questions later. Many invitations later. Many meeps later. Many meeps later. Many memories later. Many miles later. Many repressed memories later. Many plays later. Many superstitions later. Many tic-tacs later. Many secret parties later. Many versions later.
Many wishes later.
Many painful holes later. Many toys later. Many forks later. Much tranquility later. One bus ride later. One humongous meal later. One semester later. One season later.